Hello, everyone. I'm Sai Sandeep Ogety. It's a pleasure to be here at Platform Con 2025. So, thank you for the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my experience on implementing the multi-tenancy in Kubernetes clusters across the multiple CSPs. So, over the next couple of minutes, I'll walk over through models like cloud providers, provider patterns, and on-prem options and the best practices that you can all apply straight away. So going to the agenda, right? So today I want to talk about a couple of things the roadmap for today. Like first we'll define what multi-tenancy means in Kubernetes, then we'll cover the major isolation models for which one to choose. After that we'll deep dive into provider and also the other options like the specific approaches for AWS, EKS, Azure AKS, and also like Google GKE. And we'll look also for Rancher for multi cluster management and on-prem platforms the Rancher and the OpenShift. So next, what we'll do is we'll explore the best practices around the policies, security, and observability, and finally we'll review a real world hybrid case study, outline an implementation roadmap, and close which is like a quick look at emerging trends before opening for any questions. So without due first, what is the multi-tenancy? At its core, the multi-tenancy is about hosting multiple logical tenants, like logical environments. This could be different environments, different teams, different business units, or customers on a shared Kubernetes infrastructure. So the benefits are really clear. It is easy for cost efficiency and also streamlined operations, and also faster onboarding. And but with those benefits, some challenges around isolation are also must say, you must ensure that one tenant can't see or impacts other workloads, data, or networking traffic. So let's go to the models, right? What are different models in the multi-tenancy. So the first and the foremost is the namespace based. So everyone shades like a single cluster but lives in an isolated namespace. It's cost effective, but also relies on state policies and quotas. And also there are customer cluster based as well, like one cluster per tenant. And this gives as rock solid isolation, but clusters multiple quickly as tenants grow. And the other option is or the model is the virtual cluster. Tools I have used in the past, like vCluster or the loft spin. They light up the lightweight tenant, that we can say, specific control panels inside a host cluster. So you get near cluster isolation without fully overload, I would say. And also the other model is the hybrid model. Often will mix namespaces tenancy for dev or low risk teams, and full clusters for high security or production workloads. So choosing what fits your risk profile and operational capacity. So another key considerations that I would say is no matter which model you pick, focus on the design for four pillars, I would say. The first one is the security and access control, enforce the least privilege RBAC and integrate with your cloud IAM. And resource management is another key consideration, apply the resource quota and the limit ranges to prevent noisy issues. And the other one is the network isolation, which is also critical, and using network policies to segment traffic both inside and also for the cluster to the external systems. And the last is the compliance and billing. So enabling the audit logs, encryption, and tagging for cost, show back those are regularly needs. And I think as we all know, there are different different providers like EKS or AKS or Azure. I just want to deep dive into each approach, right? Like what if like if we take like EKS approach, like in AWS EKS, the IAM roles for like service accounts that we call IRSA is your like a secret weapon, and you can create IAM role for like per tenant workload, annotate a Kubernetes service accounts, and also like pod assumes that one role, like no more or less. So combine like this with like Kubernetes are backed mapped to like IAM identities, and also VPN VPC CNI, which is like a network overlay or like network policies to lock down pod to pod traffic. And also finally tag every EVS volume and the ENI and the load balancer via AWS organizations to get accurate cost allocations and show back. And the other model or the approach is the Azure AKS approach. So AKS integration, right? Like deeply with Azure Active Directory, and using like Azure AD groups in Kubernetes roles. So tenant users like service principles map nearly into like namespace level permissions. So use Azure policy also to enforce the guardrails such as like mandatory labels allowed. Container registries and like mandatory encryption. For network isolation, AKS supports Calico network policies and also the private clusters, which makes the control plane accessible within like your VNets. And also we all know the Google, right? Like Google GKE approach. So on GKE, like workload identity, mirrors like the IRSA, which we talked about like for AWS in the earlier session. So you bind a Kubernetes service account to a Google IAM service account, granting per pod GCP permissions, and GKE's RBAC integrates like with Google Groups for like user authentications or the user auths. So use like resource quota and also like the limit range in each namespace to crave or like carve out the CPU and memory, which which again like Anthos, you can also apply the Anthos policy controller on OPA based engine, like for consistent policy informants. And also like VPC native clusters give you like a pod IPs in your VPC, simplifying the network policy enforcements. And also I want to talk about also the on-prem model as well, which is like the rancher, and also we call as like RKE2 as well. So ranchers offers like unified control plane for cluster across like multiple cloud providers, AWS, Azure, or GCP, and also like on-prem. With rancher, you can create like projects, logical grouping of namespaces across clusters, and also assign the roles at the project level, which is like easy for management for like administrator. So rancher centralizes authentication like using LDAP or AD or policy informants, logging and monitoring. Whether like your cluster is running on EKS, AKS, GKE, or like RKE, which is rancher on like bare metal, you can also get the same multi-tenant management patterns across the board. And as we talked about like the on-prem model, so I just want to do a like comparison of the feature. So if you look at here, I think the feature comparison, right? So uh, like for EKS, right? So observe like that core building blocks, and also identify network policies like quotas and centralized policy, which are like universal. And abstracting these lets you like easy apply the consistency and also patterns across the providers. And you can see here the comparison like for EKS and AKS, GK, or like the Rancher platform. And also I want to talk about quickly about the best practices as well. So I think for the best practices, like we all know, enforcing the least privilege, which grant namespace admin instead of like cluster admin, whatever whenever possible, and also apply the network policies on the topology, like end to end, to limit the pod to pod or pod to external traffic. And the other best practice is the resource quotas and the limit ranges per namespace to avoid like resource contention. And the last is the centralize the policy like within tools like the OPA, open policy access, or the gatekeeper, or like Azure policy or Anthos policy controller. And like don't like rely on manual checks or like any other scripts, I would say. And also like implementation roadmap, like so and also I want to talk about quickly on let me see. Yeah, yeah. I just want to quickly talk about like policy and admission control as well. So I think lot of the organizations are using OPA, which is like a gatekeeper, which is like a rego policies for everything, from image provenance to like label informants. So you can have like a lot of OPA controllers across the clusters, and you can apply across the board, so that you can prevent developers to deploy something which is not security bind. And also all these policies admissions would help like maintaining the cluster security at the most. And also for the multi-tenancy, like I think having like a OPA policy gatekeeper across the board makes it easier, because you can have like a centralized OPA, and you can apply for across the board for all the cloud providers like EKS, AKS, RKS, or on-prem clusters or the bare metal. And that also, like I want to talk about quickly on like like security, and also like compliance as well, like how we could do like what measures we can take for security and compliance. So enforcing the pod security standards, or like PSA profiles, like to restrict the privileged container, and like also the host amounts. So encrypting the secrets at rest or at transit with KMS is the most a preferred way. And like with AWS or Azure or GCP. And also like finally, like compliance frameworks like HIPAA or PCI, into embracing that into your policy engine, so that it can check automatically for any security or compliance policies. And the last thing I want to talk about quickly is like a case study, right? Like on hybrid case and a case. So I would take like a real world example, like let's say like alpha team alpha uses like EKS for production, and team beta uses like AKS for development. And we deployed like a central rancher server in like a third account, and registered both cluster using rancher's GitHub principles. We can actually roll out the shared OPA policy bundle, like we were talking before, to enforcing the image whitelist, labeling standards, and also for the quotas. So Fluentd was also configured like to tag logs and metrics on the namespace and the cluster metadata, feeding into like central Elastic Search and also Grafana stack. So finally, like cost show back dashboards into AWS Cost Explorer and Azure Cost Management. It gives like teams a real time spending visibility. And the last but not least, I just want to talk about like future trends, like 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 if I look ahead, I would look at like the virtual clusters, which is like right now every organization wants to use it, which is same like local stack in AWS. Like you can have the developers to deploy, let's say, S3 bucket in a cloud on a on a on a on a local cluster, which is like an AWS account. And it's not an AWS account, but it's like it acts as a AWS account, so you can develop all the features accordingly. And same way, I think vCluster Loft also has like a same virtual cluster, which is like a great sessions for like for the developers who are writing coding. And also the cross plane will also let declaratively compose like multi cloud infra for like tenants. And kubefed, which is also like a federation that simplifies global cloud panels. And also the service mesh multi tenancy, which like with virtual meshes per tenant into Istio or consent, will isolate like traffic at the layer 7. And I think this brings us to the end of the content like in the presentation. So thank you once again like for the platform con 2025 for this opportunity, and thank you for all listening. I'm happy to take any questions. You can all feel free to connect me on LinkedIn, and I'm open for any discussions. Thank you all.